everyone, in this video we are going to discuss the theory that is associated with Jean Piaget, the theory of cognitive development. So when you consider this theory as a whole, we have various elements to focus on. We have the different stages that are associated with cognitive development, and also the function, the structure, and all these elements are very important. So in this session, what we are going to focus is basically the function that is behind this entire process of cognitive development. And also when you consider Jean Piaget's theory, you have to focus on stages of cognitive development as well. We have 4 different stages that are associated with it, but in this session we are not going to focus on that particular area. We'll be just focusing on a very important area to focus on, and basically some of the important terms that are associated with the theory of cognitive development, which was introduced by Jean Piaget. So in order to understand this area in more detail, we'll be just focusing on a question that was asked in NTA UGC in December 2022, the very recent exam, and through that question we'll be coming across various terms, various important terms that you need to focus on when it comes to Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. And here we have the question. So the question goes like this: a learner combines her or his previous schemas or modifies them as per new experiences. The process of combining and modifying existing schemas and to arrive at new schemas is known as, and we have the options accommodation, assimilation, adaptation, and finally equilibration. So all these 4 terms are very important. There's accommodation, assimilation, adaptation, as well as equilibration when it comes to Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. But before moving into these terms, we have to first understand what this term schema is all about. So after understanding that, we'll be coming across all these 4 different terms and we'll be trying to answer this question by the end of this session. So what do you mean by schema? So a schema refers to both mental and physical actions in understanding and knowing. In cognitive development theory, a schema includes both a category of knowledge and the process of obtaining that knowledge. So basically, what do you mean by schema? So schemas are categories of knowledge that actually helps us to understand and interpret the world. So it includes both the categories of knowledge and also the process of obtaining that knowledge. That is a very simpler way of understanding schemas. So schemas are basically category of knowledge or categories of knowledge, and this categories of knowledge is what helps us to understand as well as interpret the world that we are living in. So coming to this Piaget's theory of cognitive development, what he says that intellectual growth happens to a process that is termed as adaptation. So the intellectual growth or the development of cognitive structure or cognitive development in general happens through a process called adaptation, and this adaptation have 2 different complementary processes associated with it, which includes assimilation as well as accommodation. So we can interpret or we can understand it in this way: assimilation and accommodation are 2 different complementary processes that together forms the process of adaptation, and adaptation is what contributes to the intellectual growth of a child. So this is a general idea about all these 3 terms that we have already seen in the question. And before that, we have understood what this entire idea of schema as well, right? So that term is very important in order to understand these 2 or 3 important terms that we are going to discuss further. So if you consider these 2 different terms, assimilation and accommodation, we'll be first focusing on assimilation. What do you mean by assimilation? So assimilation is an adaptation process by which new information is taken into the previously existing schema. This is how humans perceive and adapt to new ideas. Here, the learner fits the new idea into what he already knows, and assimilation occurs when someone makes use of the pre-existing knowledge to make sense of the new knowledge. So what do you mean by this? So we have certain categories of knowledge, or we have certain schemas that are associated with the various things that are happening around us. So if we are trying to learn a new thing by associating that particular idea, that new idea, to the previously existing schema that is already there, that process can be called as assimilation. Or in other words, we are actually using the existing knowledge, the already existing knowledge, to make sense to the new knowledge. Or in other words, we are actually using the pre-existing knowledge in order to understand something new. So this process is known as assimilation. So if we are learning a new concept and you are associating that new concept to something that you have already learned. So what you're doing here is you are just associating the new information to something that you have already learned, and by this process you are coming across, or you are understanding that new concept as a whole, right? So this is assimilation is all about. So in order to understand this idea more clearer, we can just take an example like this. Let's consider a child who is having a schema about a type of animal. Let's take dog for example. So a child is only having an experience with the dog that is there in his or her house. Let's say he or she is having a pet dog, and the only experience this child is having with dogs is with this particular child's pet dog. So one day this child is seeing another dog. So when he's going out, or when she is going to another home, for example, this child is coming across, or this child is seeing another dog, and suddenly the child recognizes this new animal as dog based on his previous knowledge, because this new dog or this animal that is seen by this child is something completely new, because this child is only having experiences with dogs at her home, or this child is having the child's only experience with dog is with that particular child's pet dog. But when this child is seeing a new dog outside his or her home, this child is identifying that animal as dog, because, or this identification happens on the basis of the previous knowledge this particular child is having with that particular pet dog. So labeling this new animal as dog based on this child's previous experience with the pet dog can be called as the process of assimilation. So this is what happens in assimilation. So we are coming across a new idea, new concept, or anything for that matter, and we are associating that new idea or that new thing with something that we have already learned, or something that we already know, and understanding that new concept or that new thing can be called as, or that process can be called as assimilation. So if you consider Ossibel's idea or if you associate Ossibel's theory of meaningful verbal learning with this concept, we can say that if you consider Ossibel's ideas or Ossibel's theory of meaningful verbal learning, we have a term there that is subsumption. And this kind assimilation can be called, or it can be associated with derivative subsumption. We have two different subsumptions. We have derivative subsumption as well as correlative subsumption, and this assimilation is a process that we can associate with Ossibel's derivative subsumption. So if you are preparing for NTA UGC Net paper 1, make sure that you have an idea about Ossibel's theory as well, and we have detailed classes on Ossibel's theory in our LMS platform as well. So that's all about assimilation. Now we are moving to accommodation. So what do you mean by accommodation? Accommodation is the process by which pre-existing knowledge is altered in order to fit in the new information. So in this process, a new schema might be created in this process. So what happens here? At times, we have to alter the pre-existing knowledge that we have in order to understand a new concept. In assimilation, what we have done is we're coming across a new idea and we're associating that idea with the pre-existing knowledge, and we're trying to understand that concept as a whole. But in accommodation, what happens at times when we see a new concept, we will get or there is a possibility of having a contradiction between the things that we have learned in the past and also with this new idea that is in front of us. So what we have to do there is we have to at times make certain alterations in the ideas that we have or the pre-existing knowledge, and then only we can associate this new idea with the concept that we have already learned or we have already understood. That is accommodation. consider an example. Let's say a child knows that a dog is having 4 legs, or in other words, the child perceives the idea of dog as it is an animal which is having 4 legs. And suddenly when the child sees a new animal, or let's consider horse for example. So when the child sees a horse and the child sees the horse for the first time, and the child calls that animal as dog because the child finds that this animal is having 4 legs. Because the idea the child is having is, okay, that animal which is having 4 legs can be called as dog, and this new animal is also having 4 legs. So the child is calling that animal as dog itself. But an adult comes and says, child, it's not dog, it's a horse. So what happens in the first phase is like the child was actually trying to fit the new animal to the already existing idea or the already existing knowledge that the child is having. And suddenly an adult comes and says, it's not dog, it's horse. So what happens here? In order to understand or perceive this new idea, the child has to alter his knowledge that all 4-legged animals are not dogs. So there is an alteration happens. So the child is perceived, or the child has perceived in the past about this entire idea of dog is an animal which is having 4 legs. So the child is associating this new animal, or the child is trying to fit this new animal to the already existing idea and call that particular new animal as dog, because the child finds that this animal is also having 4 legs. And the idea the child is having is, okay, an animal with 4 legs can be called as a dog. So suddenly someone points out that it's not a dog but it's a horse. So what happens here? The child has to alter the pre-existing knowledge that the child is having in his or her mind that all 4-legged animals are not dog. So what happens here? In order to understand or in order to fit in the new information, the child has to make some alterations in the pre-existing knowledge. So that process can be called as accommodation. What happens in assimilation? In assimilation, the process is very simple. When the child is seeing a new thing or we are coming across a new idea, we are just trying to understand that new idea using the pre-existing knowledge, or we are associating this new concept with the pre-existing ideas or knowledge, and we're trying to understand the new idea as a whole. But in accommodation, what happens? We cannot fit in the new information to the already existing information or knowledge as such, but we have to make certain alterations in order to fit the new information to the schema or the mental structure that we have about that particular thing. So coming back to the explanation that is given here, accommodation is a process by which pre-existing knowledge is altered in order to fit in the new information. So one of the most important things is, through accommodation, what happens, there is high possibility of creating new schemas. So the thing is, we are having already already existing schema about a particular concept, but through accommodation, at times we have to combine this already existing information together, or we have to modify the already existing schema, and that will create a new schema in general or altogether. So that is accommodation is all about. So we have came across different terms. We learned about schema, then we have discussed about adaptation, which includes both assimilation as well as accommodation. And when we considered assimilation, we have connected it with Ausubel's idea of derivative subsumption, and this accommodation can be associated with Ausubel's idea of correlative subsumption. So if you can just connect these two different ideas and understand it, it will be really helpful for you to answer the questions that will be coming from this area. So accommodation is all about the process by which pre-existing knowledge is altered in order to fit in the new information. So coming to the next important term that we have seen in that particular question, that is equilibration. So what do you mean by equilibration? Piaget believed that all children try to strike a balance between assimilation and accommodation, which is achieved through a mechanism Piaget called equilibration. The concept of equilibration describes how new information is balanced with existing knowledge. It helps explain how children are able to move from one stage of thought into the next. So basically, this entire process of cognitive development actually includes both assimilation and accommodation. Okay, so it should be there in a balance. It should be in a balance. This assimilation and accommodation and are two different processes, or they are associated with two different adaptation processes, and there should be the child is having, or the child is trying to have a balance between these two, and this balance is achieved through a mechanism which is called as Equilibration. So what I mean by equilibration, this describes how new information is balanced with existing knowledge or existing information. So there should be a balance between the process of assimilation and accommodation that actually provides a balance or the equilibrium between the new information it actually balances the new information with the existing knowledge. So this is how we are exploring new things, or this is how we are developing through the different stages of cognitive. This is the whole process of cognitive development. We can say it in that manner. So when you consider equilibration, we can say that this equilibration happens through 3 different phases. So what is the first phase? First, children are satisfied with their mode of thought and therefore are in a state of equilibrium. So at the first stage of knowing something new, the child is having a state of equilibrium itself. So the child knows certain things. If you consider that example of knowing a dog, the child is having an idea, the child has perceived a particular idea about dog, and the child is okay with that idea, the things or the thought or the ideas that the child is conceived. So the first phase, the children are satisfied with their mode of thought and therefore are in a state of equilibrium. What happens in the next stage? Then they become aware of the shortcomings in their existing thinking and are dissatisfied. That is, are in a state of disequilibration and experience cognitive conflict. So if you consider that the example that we have taken, the child is having an idea about the dog, and the child sees a new animal and calls it as a dog because the child's idea of a dog is an animal which is having 4 legs, and this new animal is again having 4 legs, so the child calls it as dog. So suddenly someone comes and says, no, it's not a dog, it's a horse. What happens there? The entire idea the child is having some issues there. So the child realizes that there is some shortcomings in the existing knowledge or the existing thinking, and the child becomes dissatisfied. So in this phase, what happens? There comes a stage of equilibration, disequilibration, and the child experiences cognitive conflict. And the last stages, they adopt a more sophisticated mode of thought that eliminates the shortcomings of the old one. So in the final phase, the child tries to perceive this new idea. So in order to understand that idea, the child will make certain alterations in the pre-existing knowledge, and the child will be adopting a more sophisticated mode of thought. So this is how we are developing, or this is how this cognitive development happens, or we're moving from a particular stage to the next level in our cognitive development. So in the last phase, they adopt a more sophisticated mode of thought that eliminates the shortcomings of the old one, that is, reach a more stable equilibrium. Alright, so this is the entire idea of adaptation, which includes assimilation as well as accommodation, and also we try to understand the idea of equilibration, which is basically a mechanism that helps us to keep a balance between these 2 different processes, that is assimilation as well as accommodation. So coming back to the question that we have seen at the beginning of this session, a learner combines her or his previous schemas or modifies them as per new experiences. The process of combining and modifying existing schemas and to arrive at new schemas is known as. So the question focuses on the learner, the entire activity happens. The learner combines his or her previous schemas or modifies them in order to conceive new experiences or new ideas. So the process of combining or modifying existing schemas, and the key term is here, to arrive at new schemas is known as. So where comes the existence, or where comes the entire process of arriving at new schema? That is the focus area here. So we have different options given here: accommodation, assimilation, adaptation, and equilibration. So of course, if you consider the key terms that are given in the question, we can say that the right answer for this question is option A, that is accommodation. So in this video, we have focused on Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. It's a very vast theory. We have various ideas to focus on. Schema is an important concept or idea that we have to study, and then we have the process of adaptation, which includes both assimilation as well as accommodation, and we have focused on the idea of equilibration as well. And also, when you consider Jean Piaget's theory, you have to focus on the various stages that are associated with cognitive development as well. So we haven't gone to that particular area in this session. We were particularly considering the entire function that happens behind the development or the cognitive development in general. So I hope this video will be really helpful in your preparation, and this question that we have discussed is a very recent question that happened or that came in NTA UGC in a December 2022 exam. So make sure that you are having a very good idea about this particular concept, and make sure that you're analyzing the new trends and the new areas that are exploring in the exams as well. So if you need that kind of an approach, a very updated approach to your preparations in NTA UGC NET Paper 1, you can just consider Appleby Academy's courses. We are offering both online as well as offline courses for different courses or different subjects. We are providing courses for Paper 1. Then we have Economics, English, Commerce and Management. So if you want to know more about our courses, you can just contact to the number that is given in the description box. So thanks for watching and happy learning.